The Russians were using their psychics to target our congressmen, our senators, in hopes of like driving up the anxiety, maybe producing a stroke or a heart attack.
But when you have the CIA, saying that yes, we had Project Stargate, this is real, we had real psychics working.
They also said it never did any good for them. The problem with that statement is that they kept coming back to us for help for 23 years. They wanted to see if we could report on items that were huge distances away. Turned out it was very accurate. Remote viewing, is the more your ego's involved, the worse it gets. I've been doing this almost 50 years. In all the science behind it, we can't tell you how it works. Because that's when I looked up and there was a body half in and half out of the swinging door, and it was me. It's usually pretty easy to go into the past. And the reason why it's easy is because when you're in the past, you're seeing things that we have concepts for.
So have you gone back to look at how they were constructed?
Oh yeah, that's an easy thing. Going into the future, whole different problem. The Department of Defense turns out to have sent people out to target these. I said, so what's the target? And I opened it. It said Mars 1 million BC.
All right. Well, Joe McMoneagle, remote viewer number 001 for the U.S. government. Yeah, I am really honored to have you here and excited to talk to you today and kind of get into some of the details of the program and what you've been able to accomplish in your life and in your career. So, just first off, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Not a hard thing to do.
Yeah. You're a fisherman. You're going to be fishing your way back home on the way back?
My way back home.
Yeah,
right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, good. Well, I guess just, I'll start off with a couple of questions, and I think we'll kind of start just getting right into it,
Okay.
When did you first realize that you had psychic abilities?
I'd have to say back when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
And what happened?
Well, I grew up in a slum area of Miami. I like to say ghetto. It sounds better. We had like bars on the windows and doors. That kind of thing. And, it was hard growing up there because there was a lot of gangs and I had 4 sisters. My twin sister, who was also younger than me by 18 minutes. But, four sisters growing up in a area where there's gangs and all these kinds of problems. It was tough. I had to kind of protect them in a sense. And when they were really young, I'd walk them to school, that sort of thing. And the only time it was hard for me is when I was alone because, everybody wanted me to join their gang. I was like the token white kid in the neighborhood. And I think they just wanted me to join because I was fast.
Okay. You'd add value.
Yeah.
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 So what was it? I mean, was there a moment when you realized that you were gifted? Well,
Psychic functioning in reality is basically situational awareness where you're listening to your senses more than you are anything. And your senses, they all work. And if you're, paying attention, you'll hear things, see things, smell things. But then you also get information from the, I don't know what you'd call it, from the ether or whatever you want to call it. It just happens. It's kind of like if you, and I'm sure this has happened to you before, if you went to a party and you didn't know anybody there and you just came in the door and you just scan the room and you have this sense that the guy standing over by the window is somebody you don't want to know. And the person sitting in the easy chair on the other side of the room is somebody you just really want to go over and talk to. It's that sense, people are generally really good at reading other people. But when you can read your environment too, that's really a benefit.
So how would you describe the abilities that you have? What makes them, because remote viewing is a skill and a talent, and it's something that you develop. But then psychic abilities are almost something, I know that it's all very much related, but different in a way too.
The difference is this. Psychics cannot call themselves remote viewers unless they can do remote viewing along with the protocol. There's only one protocol that exists for remote viewing, and that is everything that you're reporting on, you're completely blind to. No information at all, no hints, no anything. And anybody in the room with you has to be blind. And the reason is you can read people so well that if they know what the target is, you're maybe not getting information from the target, but you're reading it off someone by their reactions. The difference is that if you're a remote viewer, you can call yourself psychic, because in many cases you will be doing psychic work and not remote viewing because you're not fully in the protocol. So a remote viewer who's well trained could brush shoulders with somebody getting off an elevator and know something about them or know something that's going to happen to them. And that's kind of an automatic. That'll happen to a psychic too. So remote viewers can be psychic or they can be remote viewers.
Gotcha.
But the psychics can only be psychics.
Okay. What about in terms of like spiritual energy and your ability to feel and sense spiritual energy around you? Is that something that you possess and that you notice going into, old places or specific places that might be haunted or whatever it is? Do you feel that in your surroundings?
Yeah, you can sense good energy and bad energy. I happen to believe, because of my skill set, that there is something called evil incarnate, and there's good incarnate. And one has no dominion over the other. They're both about equal. And so you can be bribed in some ways to do one or the other. And if you try to do the best thing you can do and not the worst thing, what happens is you have some successes and you continue to grow in your capability. If you're totally negative and you just want to hurt people, well, that's very destructive. And so destructive uses of this stuff actually is not a good thing. So you don't tend to grow, get better philosophically. Yeah, where you do if you're doing something right. So if you really wanted to look at the differences between us and, say, the Soviet Union back in the Cold War days, we were intent on being, well, at least I was intent on being morally correct or being ethically correct. So I continued to learn and grow, where my counterparts, for the most part, were doing it for other reasons, and so they would become sort of locked in place, static. So they would just never improve or get any better, that kind of thing. At least that's my observation. It doesn't mean bad people can't do remote viewing. They can.
Yes. Have you had any paranormal experiences?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the whole thing dwells within the paranormal arena.
Yeah.
So I've had visions. I've heard things which are for my benefit, especially in the Vietnam War. I would hear things that I would listen to, and when I heard them, I would stop or do whatever the voice was telling, and it always worked out for me. Where I think other people were hearing the same things I was, but they weren't reacting to them. They were thinking it's their inner mind or something telling them something, and they just counteract it because their ego is involved. Remote viewing, if the more your ego is involved, the worse it gets.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that. I want to dive into that a little bit later in the conversation. But yeah, I guess maybe just to back it up for a second and just let people know, who you are and what your history is within the government. You remote viewer number 001.
Yeah,
So
first one recruited.
Yeah, right, and the last one living, I guess, right? So
yeah, the original 6 people
of the original
are pretty much gone.
Right.
Yeah, I think one might still be alive, but I don't know for sure.
Okay.
That's the problem. And the ones that I absolutely know are not alive. I would happen to be there when they died.
Right.
So it was predominantly stress.
Right. Yeah, and we'll dive into that too. But I think it's just important for the audience to realize that this is not something that is conspiracy theory. This isn't something that is like questioned. I mean, by the government. You have the backing of the United States government as it relates to
at least parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one thing for just people to come on and just talk about stories, but when you have the CIA saying that yes, we had Project Stargate, this is real, we had real psychics working for us to do actual work, then it's.
But they also said it never did any good for them.
Okay.
But the problem with that statement is that they kept coming back to us for help for 23 years. so to wait till the very end and say it was of no use is kind of like saying, they're pulling your leg.
Right.
I mean,
right.
The other part of it is it wasn't just them. It was 15 of the major intelligence agencies in America. And as an example, the National Security Council certainly used it. The National Security Agency,
the NSA,
actually has a permanent exhibit with my stuff in it. So, and they are absolutely supportive, because we did a lot of things for these other agencies, and the Secret Service, and 5 presidents, and so to just say, I would say anybody that says it wasn't of value, I want to see their proof.
Right. Yeah. So it's not a question of whether or not it happened. It's just a question. Some people might throw dirt on it, saying that it didn't add value, or that.
I can give you an example.
Yeah.
The Senate Select Subcommittee for Intelligence is probably the second most serious committee in Washington. They're all serious, but it's probably one of the most important. They actually approved the money for the remote viewing program year to year, and it was totally based on the successes and the failures that actually occurred the year before. So all the deputy directors would come in and report on exactly how it was used, what it did, how it was successful, how it failed, all those kinds of things. And then they would approve the money for funding it the next year. And the fact that it was refunded with approval 23 straight years says something about its value.
And this was a core group of 6 people?
That was originally the core group of 6 people. Selected from 30, selected from probably 130.
Okay. And over the course of time that the program was in its existence, how many total people psychics were within the program?
Total people, maximum was probably 22 people.
Okay.
And out of that, maybe 18 of them were actual remote viewers.
Okay. So 18 people, and a couple of the big names. I mean, you're the biggest name.
I don't know about that.
Well, Ingo Swann was...
Ingo Swann, he actually worked at Stanford Research Institute. Ingo Swann came from New York. He moved to the research facility at Stanford because they needed help with psychic functioning to test a lot of things that were being done in the science side. Science was actually developing it to make it better. And so they were discovering things that would, if you did A, it would be better. If you did B, it wouldn't be, that kind of thing. And so he was supporting the science side. He didn't do much, or I'm not sure I even knew if he did any actual intelligence collection because he didn't have a clearance. So,
and why didn't he have a clearance?
Well, he was gay, and there's nothing wrong with that. He was a really good friend of mine. We ate dinner a lot together. It's just that the military at the time,
it's just a different
social requirements. So, which is unfortunate because he was probably one of the best remote viewers walking the planet. He was doing descriptions of outer rim planets 7 years before they actually got the pictures.
Yeah, what was the story with that?
They wanted to see if we could report on items that were huge distances away, but specifically targets that no human being knew the answer to. They felt that would prove one way or another whether the information came from one human to another. The problem with the whole idea was it turned out it was very accurate. But when they started to write the papers and everything about that, what they discovered is they could talk about distance, but they couldn't talk about where the information came from because eventually everybody in the world knew the answer. So maybe the remote viewing was just going into the future and getting it and bringing it back versus going to the actual planet and getting it.
Okay, so how do you get chosen? You mentioned 130 people down, and that got dwindled down to the best, and then down from there another time. So what was it like when you first entered into the program? How were they recruiting people? Like paint that picture so we can visualize that.
Okay, I was an advisor. I was in charge of my military occupationals, especially for the world, and that's out of the headquarters at Arlington. And at the time, I was also an advisor to the commanding general on things that have to do with my MOS in
MOS,
military occupational specialty. So the general, the 3-star in charge of the INSCOM, the Intelligence and Security Command for the Army, he found out they were going to have this project if they're going to put it together, and probably put it together initially at Fort Meade. And the way he put it to me when he called me in is he said, they're starting this Hinky project. And what he meant by Hinky, he didn't know anything about it. He was nervous about it because he had never heard of anything like this. And he was afraid that if it went south, it would have an effect on him since he was the one who was approving or disapproving it. So that's how I got involved personally. What they actually did is they put word out to the command across the world and said, if you have anybody who seems to make decisions without being told to, go after answers for things nobody told them to go after for that were important, or seem to be dynamic, that dynamic about intelligence collection, let us know who these people are. And especially if these people were able to answer questions that nobody knew the answers to. So we wound up with about 130 people that came into the headquarters. Their names were sent in. And out of those, they picked some people to come in and basically tell them what they thought about psychic functioning. I was called in for that. I went in, they had a big table and it was covered with all kinds of psychic stuff. They had some, not declassified, but classified reports on psychic functioning. And they also had stuff from TV shows, off of newspapers, rag kind of things, out of England. And they said to sit here and review this stuff because we're going to ask you a question when you're through. So I spent about 4 hours just picking through the garbage on this table. And at the very end, they said, so what do you think? And I said, well, how do you mean, what do I think? And they said, do you think this is a threat? And I gave it a great deal of thought before I answered. And what I said was, I think most of the stuff on this table is crap. Okay. Some of it, I would say, could be a threat against the country if it's used the right way. They said, thank you, and I left. And meanwhile, the general was saying, you need to go out to Stanford, meet some people, and tell me what's going on, how this thing works.
Stanford Research Institute?
Stanford Research Institute, right. So I went out there and met Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and some of the other people in the lab. And when I started asking them a bunch of questions, they said, oh, well, if you really want to know about it, asking questions, you could take all day. Why don't you just do a few, and that'll tell us and you what it actually is and how well it works. So I did a series. I did 6 remote viewings in, I think it was 3 days or 3.5 days. And I ended up, when it was, in the end, when they do the analysis and the judging and everything of the results, it turned out I had 5 first-place matches, which was the highest you can get. And 1 was a second-place match, but almost a first place. And that's still the record for talking about remote viewing out at Stanford. So I came back with the idea. I wrote the report on the plane coming back in longhand for the general. I was going to tell him what it was and that I thought it really was a threat and all this. And when I got back to the headquarters, my desk was empty. And I said, why is my desk empty? He said, I'm going to send you to Fort Meade. And I begged him not to do that. I didn't want to be in that project originally.
Why did you not want to be in it?
I knew it was going to be a career killer. As soon as you got involved in this psychic stuff, I knew that when a person I knew in the military, they would want to be standing next to me because politically it could be a huge weapon on just about anybody. And I was right. So I begged the general not to send me. He said, I'm sorry, but I trust you. I want you to go. And so I did what you do in the Army. Saluted him. Said, yes, sir. And I went to Fort Meade.
Nice. So, had you practiced remote viewing prior to that? When you get there, you do 5 out of 6, top scores. How did you even know what you were doing?
I didn't. In fact, I sat in the room when I had the very first target, and Russell Targ was my monitor. Neither one of us knew what the target was because it was chosen randomly with a random number generator. They just pulled the envelope out of a safe. They didn't. The person who was going to the place was.
So a target is someone that you're attempting to locate?
Yeah.
And
it's called an outbounder.
Okay.
And what they do is the person I never met goes and uses a random generator to produce a number, and they go to the safe, and out of hundreds of targets in the San Francisco Bay Area, they pull whatever that number folder is. They don't open it. They carry it out to a car, and they drive around for like 20 minutes. Then they stop and open the envelope, and it tells them where to go. They do that so even if I saw them leaving the building and in what direction, I couldn't guess. Okay? So they get wherever they're going, and that's a set time. And at that set time, I start describing where they are. And so when Russell Targ said, so here's a picture of your target person. Tell me where they are, what they're doing. I said, how do I do that?
Right, right.
And he said, well, I don't know, make something up, whatever pops in your head. So I remember my first target distinctly. I drew very small sketches of a lot of things. I drew a building. I drew the sidewalk in front with some trees. I said there was a bicycle rack nearby. So I drew a lot of stuff. Some of it was accurate, some of it wasn't. But there was enough information on that page that somebody said, well, this is very definitely the art museum on Stanford campus. And in fact, that's where that person was standing. That was the first one I ever did. Now, I did know how well I did on the first one, but it didn't tell me anything. So I was guessing wholeheartedly on the second one. That did really well, and so on and so forth. They never told me what my results were until the end.
What are you at a desk? Are you out on couch? Are you in a bed?
Oh yeah, in this case, I was sitting on a easy chair with a coffee table, and I just drew the stuff on the coffee table.
They just give you a pencil and paper.
Yeah,
yeah, and they just say, draw this person, and
no, they actually put a picture of in front of me. They say, tell us, draw where this person is.
Draw their surroundings.
Something about where they are and what they're doing. And I'm an artist anyway, so I drew a picture of where they were standing.
Right, right. Fascinating. So what is it like? Do you have any sense for how it works?
Oh, God, I wish I did. I've been doing this almost 50 years, and I got to tell you, in all the science, and there's about 1.6 million words of science behind it, we can't tell you how it works. We don't know. We don't know if the information comes from an Akashic record or it comes from a group of people that are going to see the answer, or if it comes from whatever. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know how it gets from wherever it generates to the head of the person who reports on it. It's all a surprise. But it seems to work if you do everything according to the protocol and you're completely blind.
What do you mean you're completely blind?
In this case, they show you a picture of the person who you don't know, and they say, describe where they are, which you don't know. And some people say, well, that's kind of a hint. But yeah, the fact they're standing up somewhere, yeah. But in reality, what it's gravitated to since the very beginning, outbound, wherever the outbounder was, you could describe. Well, that's pretty simplistic. Today, they may have a requirement they put in an envelope, and the tasker goes to the person who isn't going to be in the room and tells them what they need. That would be our boss, the colonel.
Okay.
The colonel writes down what that is. Like, I want to know how the spy encrypts his messages. Well, we don't even know if it's a spy. It's all that's put into an envelope. The envelope is opaque. You can't see through it. It's a single question. So we target the envelope, and it's just a blank envelope sitting there. And the information we produce is exactly what's being asked for in the envelope. So it's gravitated a great deal away from the way it started. The big problem was, if you're going to target the KGB, you don't want to send somebody there because you never see them again. So the safest way to do it is to either use GPS location. That's a way of doing it. Mail a letter to the place with some design on the back of it and say, tell us with a picture. They show you a picture of that back of that envelope and say, tell us what you know about the place this is sitting. You know, that kind of thing. So it's gravitated to being used a lot of different ways. We've also learned over time a lot of ways of improving it, how it can be improved. We don't know anything about why that happens. We can say how you need to do things to make it actually be successful. Like where you do the remote viewing and at what time you do it, and other things like that.
What are some of those keys to making it a success?
Well, I teach it, so I can give you some of the keys. One is if you use GPS, it doesn't matter if you're like 1 square meter on the ground or 1.5 miles on the ground. That has nothing to do with what tells you what the target is. It has everything to do with the fact that there is a target, that there's some intention to get something from a target, and it might be the location, it might be what it is, it might be who made it, it could be anything. Whatever that intention is that's in that envelope that nobody can read, that's what gets you to the actual target. We don't know why that works. Bizarre, isn't it?
Very strange. Yeah. Okay, so what about in addition to, you're sitting on a chair, a comfortable chair, you've got a picture of the individual, you've got a piece of paper and you've got a pen and you're sketching, and does the room need to be quiet? Does the room need to be dark? What are your surroundings like? Does it matter?
With the original 6, our boss at the time, in order to improve it, wanted us to be as comfortable as possible. So we had a separate building we did our remote viewing in. We had a separate room for it. And everything in the room eventually was painted all gray. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was gray, even the pencils. The only thing that wasn't gray is the paper in the middle of the table. They even coated the table with gray paint. So the problem with that is, I don't know if you've ever walked into a room that's all one color. You fall down because there's no horizon. You lose your balance and you fall down. So I didn't particularly care for that. But then secondly, when they said, I came out after remote viewing once and they handed me a slip of paper and it had like numbers 1 through 25 on it. And it said, were the birds chirping outside the window too loud? Did they interfere? Yes or no? Was the rain an interference? Or how do you feel about the rain that was happening while you were doing the remote viewing? They ask a whole lot of questions, but the idea being that anything you said that was disturbing, it would fix. Well, when they first did that, I was like, get out of here. This is like a list for failure. This makes it okay to fail if you got something you can blame it on.
Right.
That didn't work for me.
The ego blames.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went back to the colonel and I said, did you invent this? And he said, yeah, I did. It's going to make it easier for you.
Yeah.
And I just crumpled it up, dropped it in his in basket.
Right.
I said, I'm not filling that out.
Right. Because your whole thing is you have to let go of ego. You have to let go of the voice in the head, of the mind, of the judgment, of the blame.
Plus, if you're military and you're in the U.S. Army and you're expected to be able to do remote viewing, you might be doing remote viewing standing next to a 155 battery. You come off your cot 6 inches with a 155 battery going off. So would that interfere with remote viewing? Hell yeah, if you didn't learn to remote view under those circumstances. So what I did is I tried to make as much noise, deal with as much outside interference as I could. And so over time, I learned to disassociate from wherever I was. And so I could be sitting in a restaurant with people talking to me and disassociate and target somebody at another table. Because I learned to do that, it's one of the reasons I can do a demonstration of remote viewing on national television, and it'll work more times than not, because nothing bothers me when I'm doing it.
Right.
Outside of maybe stress at trying to be successful. But Most people learn remote viewing under the most ideal conditions. Well, that's fine for ideal conditions. Even the Russians picked their psychics from combat. Their best psychic that they had was a 25-year-old female who was a tank commander in Chechnya. All her tanks were wiped out but hers. She was great. Also a fantastic psychic. So probably the reason why she survived. So
the Soviets began this project before we did, right? And that's why the United States decided, hey, we've got to start to catch up because we heard that the Soviets were doing this. Is that accurate?
The Soviets had a different approach. What they did is they didn't know about remote viewing, so they weren't doing remote viewing. What they did is they had an experiment they did where they set up a test with 24 mice, 12 target mice, 12 control mice, and they went to a lab where they had all these mice from genetic breeders, so they were all genetically alike. And they were randomly chosen using a random number generator and choosing the different numbers for the different mice made them either targets or controls. So they shaved their little tummies and tattooed the numbers on them. So they were all mixed up. The numbers were all mixed up. So you couldn't tell which was a control or target mice. They put them all in the cage together and sent them to the Ural Mountains. Now, when you put all these mice in the same cage, they're now competing for food and sex. So ideally, there's a slight rise in stress from that. But when you target the mice, if you're targeting only the target mice and not the control mice, it's possible to try to raise the anxiety of the target mice, but not the control mice. So they did that for a few months. They had 104 psychics, and they hammered this cage full of mice, which was up in the Ural Mountains. They're down in Moscow, 16 or 1,700 kilometers away. When they announced that they had raised the anxiety of only the target mice, they sent the mice cage to another lab, which was independent, and they said, tell us what the anxiety level is on which mouse. So the lab, you have to kill the mouse and get their brain tissue to do the test. And in the end, they said, here they are from the highest anxiety at the top to the lowest anxiety at the bottom. And since they were looking for 12, they just drew a line between number 12 and number 13. Turns out the target mice at the top matched exactly the target mice that were decided by the random generator. And they said, wow, that's amazing. So they went and did it 2 more times. And outside of, I think it was 1 mouse pair, it worked perfectly all 3 times. So they were using their psychics to target our congressmen, our senators, important military people, that sort of thing in the Pentagon, and in hopes of like driving up the anxiety, maybe producing a stroke or a heart attack, whatever. And did that work? No, it didn't. But they could never figure out why. And the reason why it actually didn't work is because the answer at the end of their experiment wasn't coming from the remote viewing, the attempts to raise anxiety on the mice, only the target mice. What it was coming from is the original guy who sorted the mice. They had told him why he was sorting them out, the mice. So as he was hitting the random generator, he was producing the answer that they wanted to see at the end of their test. So for 3 times in a row, he was the only psychic really in the whole program. And they didn't recognize that. It's a flaw in the experiment. So that's why they never got ahead or never were able to do anything. But they had good psychics. I did an experiment with their top psychic, which was this woman tank commander. And we produced a result that was amazing. We were in separate deprivation chambers. We had to figure out who was the transmitter, who was the receiver, and once we did that, we had to transmit a message of some kind. So we're underground in the deprivation chambers, and I started thinking about that. And what I came up with was, I don't need to send a message. Obviously, if we both do the same thing, somebody's a sender and somebody's a receiver. So it could be either of us doing either. So rather than try to work with that, I just said, let me put something down like she puts it down. So we had these digipads in front of us. And so that's what we decided to do. In the end, it was like the wings of a butterfly. Same on the left as on the right. There were a couple small frivets of difference, but not big enough to have made any, to ruin the picture. Yeah. So we asked him for a copy of the result, and he said, "Yet." Wouldn't share it with us.
Gotcha. So I guess I want to just understand if we know anything at all about like the science of how it works, how remote viewing itself works, because you are sitting on a chair in a building in Stanford, and you're visualizing things that are not in the same room as you are. Of course, right. You're going out and finding them. And so, and with just a picture in some cases, or a social security number, or whatever it is, and so you're able to somehow find that person just from the face of that individual in a city that's got millions of people in it. Yeah. You're able to go out and so what's actually happening, right? I mean, is your life energy, is your spirit traveling, or are you? Do you feel like that it's somehow connected to the ether, that you're able to scan everything simultaneously? Like, what is
how come we get the answer? Basically, it has to do with intent. Yeah, intent is everything. Like if you're looking for a small child that's missing who could possibly die because the temperature is dropping like a rock, the reason you find the small child is because that's the shared intent of everyone that knows about it. Nobody's sitting there thinking, "Oh well, I'm indifferent about whether they ever find the kid." No, nobody's thinking that. Nobody's thinking, "Oh well, I don't really care what the outcome is." No, everybody's thinking with the same intent, which is find the kid, find him alive. And because of that intent powers the whole outcome. So when it comes back to you that you saved the kid, it's that feeling of being high about saving a human life. That's sort of what feeds into the success. Because everybody's having the same feeling of wanting to save them. Where you run into problems is where you're looking for, a chest in the ground, and half the people don't want you to find it because they want to go back later and look for it themselves. Or let's say it's stolen goods and the police department's hanging around because they want it. There's a lot of diverse feelings about it. So the intent's not as pure. So when you try to do the collection of the materials that will help you find it, the intent's not as pure as looking for that missing kid. So whether you find it or not is not as material. The intent isn't as pure. I'm not explaining this very well, but so in a spiritual sense, when everybody has the same intention for what they determine to be a success, it usually works extremely well, especially if everybody's on the same sheet of music. When you run into a problem, it's like with the lotto. Okay, how many people are out there for a $10 billion lotto all wanting to get it? So that's how many intents that are all running juxtaposed to one another. So as a result, it fails.
Do you feel like there's a conscious connection between you and the individual that you're seeing, whether it's a child or this subject that drove around and parked somewhere and is waiting for you to draw him? Or
in a sense, yes, there is a connection, because you'll be reporting things that the child you're looking for, the missing child you're looking for, may be, I don't know, doesn't want to be found. Maybe it's a 13-year-old doesn't want to go back to the same home. Or maybe it's someone who is, I don't know. If they're not intent on being found, then you got like a fly in the ointment. So intent can differ between people. It's the people involved. I've done experimental viewings roughly 7 times where they've worked very, very well. Where I set the intent by actually doing the remote viewing out of sequence. Usually it's a cause and people think it's a cause and effect relationship. So you have a target out there, you've identified the target somewhere, and you ask the viewer to tell you about it. And the viewer does a really good job at doing that, but 20% of what they say isn't accurate, okay? So the other way to do it would be to do the target before it's ever chosen. So then there's no intent existent when you do the actual drawing of the target. So when you go to select the target randomly, the only intent is by the person who drew the picture. So the intent produces a target, and the target, when it's evaluated against the actual viewing, turns out to be more correct than all the other random targets that you didn't draw. You understand what I'm saying?
I think so, yeah.
It's like fulfilling the loop. And what's nice, the thing I like about science, okay, if you know the science behind something, it's attestable. In other words, if let's say you want to improve your life, so you want to make decisions that are going to be constructive and positive so that your life keeps improving. Well, a lot of the reasons why people have lives that, go really good for a while and fall apart, go really good for a while and fall apart, is because they're not really heavy into part of the decision making, but they should be. So someone who lives a life and understands the difficulty that they're trying to overcome, if they make a positive and constructed effort to overcome it, then they in fact are generating the result through their expectation. So remote viewing, because nobody knows what the question is before you produce it, is kind of like that. But if you take it out of sequence, now you got a remote viewer actually saying, this is the target, and then getting up and leaving the room. So when it's chosen randomly, the only intent is to see that it's real. So the target, when it's randomly chosen from, say, 3,000 targets, it appears, and it satisfies the requirement that the viewer just did by drawing it. So one intent, the viewer. Nobody else knows what's going on, so there are no other intents. And that works beautifully. I've done that like 7 times. We use it to raise research money. I mean, it's scary for people. Oh, how did that happen? How'd you know before it was ever selected? Well, that's a perfect remote viewing because the viewer is the one creating the target.
Gotcha. Right.
You see?
Yeah. And this is the kind of stuff that is taught at the Monroe Institute, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We teach a lot of things there, but one of the things is remote viewing, and I with 2 cohorts, we teach that course. And the only guarantee we make is when you come in, you don't know if you're a remote viewer. When you go out, you will all know you're a remote viewer.
So you had an out-of-body experience.
Mm-hmm.
You were poisoned. This was an assassination.
Yeah, it was profound
attempt.
out-of-body experience.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Tell that story. I'd love to.
Yeah.
Because this has to have impacted your ability to remote view.
I had a major impact.
Yeah.
It was, I think, I can't remember exact dates now so easily, but it was, I think, 1970 time period. And I was married and overseas with my wife. And I was doing a job where I couldn't go home every night. I was in the field and didn't want anybody to know I had a wife because it would have put her in danger. So I would meet her once a month. We'd meet at a guest house. I'd send word for somebody to bring her there, and then we'd eat dinner with that person, and my wife and me would share the dinner, and then she would go back, or she would stay for the weekend, and the person who brought her would go back. And then at the end of the weekend we spent together, he would come and get her and take her back home. So I was really pleased with that because that kept her out of danger. We got to see each other once a month, and because of the job I was doing at the time. So,
can you say what the job you were doing?
No. So he brought her. We met at I guess it was in Brunau am See. This is the town that Hitler was born in. He was born over a butcher shop. Go figure, right? But that's not where the guest house was. So we're in a really nice guest house, and this person brought her there that I knew. And so we asked him to stay for dinner with us before he left to go home. And so he, my wife, and I had dinner in the guest house restaurant. I only had a few sips of water, and I started getting this, like, just terrible feeling like I was going to be projectile vomiting or something. And I didn't want to do it in the restaurant. So I said, "Excuse me," and I headed for the door. When I hit the swinging door, it was a glass swinging door with my hand, there was like a snap of the fingers, and I was standing on a cobblestone street in the rain right outside the guest house, watching the rain go through the palms of my hands. And I said, "Uh-oh, something's wrong." And it doesn't look good. That's because that's when I looked up and there was a body half in and half out of the swinging door, and it was me. And so the man who brought my wife came out and picked me up off the sidewalk, pulled me in his lap, and started hitting me in the chest really hard, because back then I don't think anybody knew CPR. So he hit me in the chest, and he was saying, yelling at me to breathe. And he wasn't getting a response. But every time he hit me in the chest, I was back in the body looking at him. And I was trying to go, "Please stop," because every time I was in my body, I was in agony. And so about the time I'd go, "Please," and I'd be out of body again, watching him draw back to hit me again. So I was really yelling, "Stop," in my head. And I stayed out. And I'm watching this going on. No result. I saw them, listening to me, no result. Checking for heart pulse, no heart pulse. So they threw me in the car, took off. We had to cross borders officially back then. So They went from Austria to Germany, Germany back into Austria, and then back into Germany again to follow the roads to get to a clinic. It was an emergency clinic in Passau, Germany. So I think that was about 38, 40 kilometers away. So we're in the or they're taking off in the car with my body. I'm outside going, whoa, wait, So I'm chasing the car out of body. We get to the clinic, and I watched them from hovering over my car. I watched them pull me out and put me in fireman's carry and head for the door. So he goes to the door, and it's locked. And I'm thinking, oh, this is getting better by the minute, right? And in fact, it was locked because I didn't know and found out later all their hospitals and clinics lock their doors, their outside doors at 8 o'clock in the evening. And so if you want to get in, you ring a bell. Well, he started kicking the door, and the doctor showed up. And the doctor's in a wheelchair. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, this has got to be a crazy dream, but it didn't feel like one. Because I was near panic. I wanted to get back in my body, but every time I tried, it didn't work. So hovering in the emergency room, watching them cutting my clothing off, putting tubes in my nose and all that stuff. And I felt heat on my neck. So I had drifted up to the ceiling, and I thought it was one of those bright lights in the emergency room. So I turned around to see if that's what was producing the heat. And all of a sudden, I'm standing in the light, and the light is different. It's so intense, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I mean, it was the most intense light I've ever seen. And I'm in this ball of light, and a voice says, you got to go back. And I was like, no. I'm looking for something to hang on to because I didn't want to go back. I was dead, and that's where I was going to stay. No, sorry, you have to go back. There's a second snap of the fingers, and I sat up. And I've been comatose for maybe 12 hours. And naked under a sheet, looking around, wondering how I got from the light in the emergency room to the sheet. And it's been 12 hours, and it's like, I'm wondering where time went. And
back in your body and alive.
Back in my body.
And 12 hours
and 12 hours has gone by. And I didn't want to be there, but I was there anyway. And there's a German patient laying next to me, and he just looked at me and started freaking out. And I had no idea why. Maybe I'm missing my hair. I don't know. Something's wrong. So he ran out, and I told him, it's okay. God's a white light. You can't die. So the doctor comes in with a nurse, and I'm sedated. So I wake up the next morning. That's like another 6 hours away. I wake up in the morning, and I have a mask on my face. It's taped on. I'm tightened down in a gurney under a blanket. I couldn't move my arms or anything. And they were putting me in the gurney on the tops of the seats of a limo. And all the windows in this limo were sealed with tinfoil. So you couldn't see in or out. And I'm starting to think, oh man, I don't know what's going on. I fell out again when the next time I woke up, I was in the end of a rest home. They'd gone in and leased a wing of this rest home, made everybody move out except for me in the last room. It's like maybe 10 rooms, 5 on each side, and then me. So all the other rooms are empty. And now I'm dealing with a psychiatrist. They're trying to figure out how much brain damage there is from no heartbeat, no breathing, that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, there's no damage. I feel normal. So I'm interacting with a psychiatrist, and he's trying to ask me questions to find out how badly I've been damaged, because they think I'm really suffering from brain damage, because I keep saying, God's a white light. You can't die. It's okay. Lose your fear, you know.
Is that when you lost fear?
Oh, yeah, definitely forever. And that psychiatrist couldn't get through to me, so he left. They brought in another one. And the second guy, I think he had already talked to people who had near-death experiences, because he came in and he smiled a lot and told jokes. And he leaned over at this one point and said, whispered to me, he said, if you want to leave, you're going to have to act normal. And I thought about that for a minute. I leaned over and whispered back. I said, what's normal? He laughed. I laughed. But eventually he declared me healthy and fine, which nobody could understand. So then I got assigned to the 66 MI in Munich.
And nobody could understand it because of the length of time that you were out of your body. Is that right?
They couldn't understand the fact that,
or clinically,
that I was
clinically dead.
For 38 minutes, 38. I had no heartbeat,
Wow.
no breathing.
Wow.
And then I woke up in the emergency clinic, and now I'm talking about God's white light. You can't die or cease to be. And they were asking me questions about that. I was saying, well, yeah, you can't cease to exist. You change your clothes. That's all it is. You change, like, your appearance. You become something else. But your mind, your experiences, you actually take your experiences with you. In fact, what you found, I said to one person, I said, you know, when you die, or in the process of dying, you review your entire life instantaneously.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they looked at me and said, that's nuts. And I said, no, it happened. And I think I know why. If experience is the only thing we can actually carry with us when we die, you know, because our mind goes with us. If you can take your experiences, all your experiences with you, every time you do something, you make a decision and you do something, it produces an experience. We're only getting a very tiny part of that. That experience is being shared with whoever else is there, their perspective, all those things. So it affects more than just you. So I started thinking about that, and the conclusion I came to was, holy cow, you know, it's a learning process of some kind. And if you want to keep learning, you stay. If you don't, you leave. And whatever that learning entails, it entails more than just your private experience. All the experience of all the other people present who had the same experience with you, they're getting it totally different. It's affecting them the way they're affected, not how you meant to affect them. So when you find that out and you get the entire experience, which is remembering from all the people that you didn't know you were, it suddenly is like total review of your life, and boom, it becomes 20-fold more important. It affects you deeply. And that's why you go, you know, I just reviewed my life and it was instantaneous. That's how it happens. What I found, and this came from years of thinking about it, what I found, it equates to most of all. It equates to how we view heaven and hell. You think of it this way. No matter your reasoning behind why you do things, if you're not looking out for everybody else you know or that are in your proximity, if you're not taking some responsibility for them too, then when you get that overwhelming total experience from everybody that happened to be there that's part of you, it could be negative, where you view that experience as positive. So I don't think that's true fully. I think what happens is that it's a mix. We find out that most of our things that we did in life are positive and creative and constructive. And that's things we share with other people, and they have the same idea. So we're all affected the same way. But look at Mao Zedong and look at Hitler. How many people did they murder? Now, they think, in their viewpoint, maybe they think they're doing a service for their country. And they die and find out they're part of all those people they deliberately murdered. And they're getting the full experience of it now. And how do you fix that? You can't. You're now different. You're wearing different clothes. You're somewhere else. You're the same entity with a different set of clothes, different structure to your thinking, everything. You want to fix the things that are hurting you. What if you can't? That's hell. What if you find out that you did think positively and constructively in your decision making for all the people around you as well? It's not right all the time, but at the end, when you review everything, it becomes either more constructive and positive or whatever. So it's either heaven or purgatory, whatever. You got to make up for it in some way. So, I'm thinking very deeply about this stuff for 40 years.
Right.
And I'm coming to the conclusion that it's all about doing things, learning from them, and sharing it in your decision making. And that way your life is positive and constructive all the time. Your feedback when you review your entire lifetime is positive and constructive. That's where you want to be. If you're not, maybe you have to repeat it a few times. Maybe that's why reincarnation is so powerful with some people. I get a sense that there were times that I reincarnated, but in some of those times it was way back there and not very pretty. And maybe I was making up for something. I don't know. I'm just, at the point I'm selling here is you got to be awake and aware, what I call situationally awake in all your dealings with other people. That's a positive. If you don't pay any attention and you just do it for yourself, it may not be good for not repeating this over and over. That kind of thing.
Fascinating. Yeah. So I did a podcast with a guy named Jeffrey Long,
Mm-hmm.
and Jeffrey has studied 4,000 cases of near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. Mind-blowing, absolutely fascinating, and just a great talk. I learned so much from him. And a lot of what he talks about is things that you're talking about here.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I don't know him.
Yeah, you should watch the podcast. I think it'll add a lot of light and texture to the things that you've actually experienced. But
interesting.
People often, when they leave their body, they're often greeted by entities. Mm-hmm. Not 100% of the time, but most of the time. Did you see anything around you?
Not then.
Okay.
But since then, I have a recurring sort of spontaneous out of body where it's identical every time. I go out of body, I go outside, I walk to a curb, and I wait. And this funky-looking vehicle shows up. It doesn't have wheels, it's just a funky vehicle. And there's a driver, and he greets me the same way every time I get in. And I always say to him, "Where are we going today?" And he takes me somewhere where I observe things happening that cannot be happening here. Okay? So, I don't know what that's all about.
Interesting.
But
yeah.
It is recurring, and it's going the same direction every time. But the events are different to a certain degree. So
interesting.
I don't know how to answer that question other than what I just said. But
right. Yeah, the near-death experience, the commonalities between them are often these entities that greet you, and then this light that you see, and oftentimes people travel through this light. The same light that you described, people describe it as a tunnel as well, and that because they can travel through it. And then they're going somewhere, and then they have their life review. And then they do a life review, and again, like you said, it's instantaneous. But they also do past life reviews in a lot of cases as well. Yeah,
really.
Yeah,
Maybe that's what I'm doing with this cab driver or whatever he is.
Could be. Yeah, could be. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about that because it's very much in line with what other near-death experiencers have.
I think we should be sitting down and going over this stuff with people with spontaneous out of bodies and see what gels.
Right.
You could write a whole book on that.
Yeah, for sure.
That'd be really cool.
For sure. So that experience and leaving your body, I mean, it has to be correlated with this ability to remote view. It just feels like, you must be in some sense, whether you know it or not, you're conscious of it or not. I know it's not as powerful of an experience. It's not potentially your full spirit that you are that's leaving your body. Potentially just a piece of it is going out there and making contact with another entity,
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
And well, it isn't and it isn't. It's not. It's never left me feeling strange. It leaves me feeling like I just got another truth handed to me. So I try to be situationally awake and aware all the time. But that was in my when I was doing the radio recon in Vietnam. You're doing the same thing. You're being situationally awake and aware. So that's probably reinforced a lot of this stuff for me too.
When you were traveling, when you were following the car and you were trying to keep up with it and you were in the hospital, what was the feeling? What did it feel like?
I felt like if I didn't stay close, I might never find my body again. That was scary. But then, sort of at the end of the 38 kilometers or so they had to drive, I was catching up to the car, and I had these bizarre feelings when I made connection again. Then I was totally indifferent to what was going on. I just was an observer watching it. And the strange thing is that I lost track of my wife at the point when I got to the clinic. So when I was dealing with the results of everything with the psychiatrist in Munich in the rest home, I kept asking where my wife was, and all they would tell me is that they're letting everybody think you're dead because we don't know if it was poison. It was the doctor who said it was probably poison. But they weren't absolutely sure, and they didn't know if it was poison who did it. It could have been the Soviets, the Chinese, the Czechs, the Poles. Could have been anybody back then, because it was the back in the Cold War. So that didn't bother me at the time because I was trying to readjust to being here. And what happened? They finally told my wife. And that helped in getting me to her being an ex-wife. She was really ticked. So it took like 6 days for them to tell her that I was actually alive. And I went from where I lived to Lynchburg, which is 50 miles south of where I am, and gave a presentation there to a group of, I'd have to say, elderly people. And in the back of the room was a guy with a beard, and he got up when everybody else had left, and he walked up to me, and he said, "Do you remember who I am?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't remember you." He said, "I worked for you when you died."
Wow.
So everybody in my detachment were led to believe I had died.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a quick break. We'll, let's get a bite to eat. We'll take a quick a nature break, and we'll come back. But this has been fantastic, man.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, really appreciate it. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was past and future remote viewing and kind of how that works and how it differs from traditional. What is that all about? How do you do that?
Well, it is different. Past and future are totally different from one another. And it's different from present. Present, we fool ourselves into thinking is fixed, and it's not. It's changing all the time, and we maybe don't notice the changes. Because when you're sitting in a room and you're looking around the room, you're not seeing it complete. You're seeing it with only the parts that you recorded. So there may be things on a windowsill or maybe things on top of a cabinet that you never saw, where other people saw those and didn't see the case in the corner that you saw. We make an assumption that everybody sees the same thing. We don't. We see the things that meet our requirement for being comfortable in the room. And then, and you can, that's a testable, and you can prove it by interrogating people, by taking them into the room, whipping a blindfold off, and talking to them for 2 minutes, and then put the blindfold back on and walk them out, then ask them what they saw. If they're really engrossed in the conversation, they didn't see much. So that when two people are communicating and one goes away for an hour and comes back, the best they can ever do in their understanding for one another is you can say, well, I went away for an hour because I went into town and did some shopping. The best you can say is, I believe you. You don't know. You will never know for certain that's what that person did.
Okay.
But we make great assumptions like that. We put 2 and 2 together, or actually 1.8 with 2, and call it 2 and 2.
So when you're remote viewing and you're sitting in a chair and you, I mean, do you have an intention to go to a past moment versus a present moment versus a future moment? Are you deciding that?
No.
No.
What decides it is whatever the requirement is in the sealed envelope. So if it's go into the past and report on something, that's what you do. And you may go back 1,000 years, you may go back 2 hours. Doesn't matter. It's usually pretty easy to go into the past. And the reason why it's easy is because when you're in the past, you're seeing things that we have concepts for. In other words, if you see somebody putting together a wooden box, you know whether it's a coffin or they're getting ready to mail something, okay, by the way it looks, because the concept for coffins was developed a long time ago. But we're able to tell those differences. Going into the future, whole different problem. Let's say we're going to do some remote viewing in the year 1975, and it's 1 month, and we're going to go ahead 3 months into 1975, the same year. So we're only going a few hours ahead, and we're targeted on a specific room. We don't know that, but it's a very specific room, and describe what's going on in there. Okay, so it would go something like this. The guy would say, "Oh wow, there's some kind of glass thing there, and it's got a roiling cloud-like substances mixing together, and there's a huge amount of energy going into it, and there's this sort of vacuum cleaner sound, and there's a beam coming out of the other end, and it's a coherent light beam, and it's chewing its way through 4 inches of stainless steel." Everybody in the room would look at you and say you're nuts, because none of that's possible yet, because you're 4 hours ahead when they actually accidentally discover a pump laser and are capable of doing that. So it's dependent on when it happens. When 2 and 2 things are brought together, you don't always get just the third one you want to see. You may get 4 or 5 different things. And it may be that everybody who looks into the future sees all but one of those outcomes. And that one outcome will confuse everyone. Because the conceptualization that allows it to happen hasn't been developed yet. You know, it's kind of like when the industrial, the age of industry first appeared. guys had, like Ford had this idea for the long assembly line where you do one thing at a time and produce the car out the other end. And he made a ton of cars that way. Had he not done that, we might not have even gone to cars. We might have gone to Airbuses or something. Who knows? The idea being that you have to conceptualize a way to doing something before you can talk about it. So going to the future is extremely difficult. Even more difficult is telling the time when something happens. And I know that because there are a lot of predictions in a book I wrote. It's called Ultimate Time Machine, where I made a lot of predictions based on time. The problem is my times are wrong. My years, times, all those things are wrong. So predictively, it's difficult to state something is going to happen at a specific time. However, it doesn't mean it won't happen. So, things get very complex going into the future. Going into the past, you still have the same difficulty with time, but if you're talking about baseball bats, you know how they're made. See? So going into the past is easy. If you go past the point of baseball bats, there was no baseball.
I thought you were going to say baseball bets. So you could be a multi-trillionaire if you could go into the future and understand who's going to win certain games.
There actually is a way to do that. It's called ARV, Associative Remote Viewing. It was designed based on the original protocol. It's the only other form of remote viewing that's ever been approved. And the way it's done is it's done with a number of people, and any one thing, any one person doing something cannot tell the others. So the first thing you do is you have someone who picks two specific pictures that are not identical. They're as different as they can be. Like one's a picture of a pizza, and the other is a picture of a concrete block. Those are two supremely different targets. So then you have a question, and the question can be, who's going to win the next baseball game that occurs somewhere at a specific time? Okay, winning is not everything, but betting is. So let's say you're going to bet on the spread for that game. So you need to know how many scores were made by whom. Well, you can actually get that by going into the future and getting the exact scores at a specific time and knowing what the spread is. You do that by assigning above the spread or below the spread is two distinctly different pictures. But you don't tell the viewers that. You tell the viewers that the morning after the game has been played, I will give you the actual target that you will describe to me now. Okay? So they describe the target they're going to see the next day after the game is over. And let's say it's the pizza. And so the person who has picked the two pictures gives it to a judge, and the judge says, I'm going to make the pizza bet above the spread, and I'll make the concrete block bet below the spread. And so when he gets the results, he judges the remote viewings, and he says, there's 31 for concrete block and 9 for pizza. Well, that represents possibly a high enough percentage rate that you would want to bet on the spread being above, in which case you win. Okay? There's a lot that can go wrong with that. And the big things that go wrong are when you get into the habit of doing it and you're close to the edge of a change in reality that can blow the feet right out from under it. That would be a rainstorm. It gets rained out, so it's neither. Well, if it turns out it's neither, the person doing the judging just simply says pass, so you don't bet. If it's something that says that anything else might happen. It's always a spread. If you want it to be, you want to make sure your bets are at least 95% accurate. Well, if you have 10 viewers and you have, out of the 10, you have one that doesn't get the target, you can't bet because that leaves you with 90. If you want 95%, though, in order to pick the right target, you just double your viewers. So now you have 20 viewers, which is 5%. And if all but one gets the target, you bet the target that it matches. So you go forward now, the game's played, you don't know, you still don't know whether or not you did the right thing until you see the result. The picture they get to see is based only on the result. The other picture never exists. It gets torn up, thrown in the trash. Nobody ever sees it. So you've just completed a loop beginning with two pictures and ending with the one that's the answer. You understand? And that feedback is given to the viewers. And that's been done a number of times, by the way. All the equipment for a Waldorf school in California was bought by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ using associative remote viewing. They made 14 straight calls on silver futures. There's another group that did it. They made 12 calls on much heavier bets, and they walked away with 200,000. And there's a number of other ones. So as long as you follow the rules, it works. As soon as you stretch the rules, it fails. Okay? So it's a really great thing. I've used it for buying a car. Do I buy this car or that car? And it could be that the car I really liked my whole life is like the Jaguar, the XK, and convertible. Oh, I love that car. So should I buy that car or should I buy, I don't know, an Audi TT? Okay. I would use ARV for that. And I just hire 10 of my friends, say, give me 90 percentile probability. And, but the thing about it, it can only work if you destroy the other target completely and no one ever sees it. If you show it to somebody, now they got a problem because what they probably drew won't match anything altogether. It'll be a little bit of both. In picking remote viewers, people are really good remote viewing. The people you always want to pick are the people who, when they do a remote viewing, you look at it and you can see that it worked. If you look at it and it's tough, really tough to see which picture it matched, or it matched one of the pictures by 52% or something, you know that that's a bad set of targets. Something's going to go wrong. It's a pass. You just don't bet.
Okay. So, when looking into the past, you're an ancient history person, right? I'm into all those mysteries as well. So, I mean, you mentioned that the way to go into the past is through somebody will give you an envelope and you don't know what's in it, but it'll tell you a date that you're going to go to. But
it doesn't have to tell you a date.
It doesn't have to tell you a date.
Just
okay.
Can tell you an event.
Right. So things like the pyramids, and when those were built. I mean, have you used your ability to go back and to try to figure out and to find out what the true dates of some of the construction of these objects are? Not objects, but structures.
Yeah, the pyramid, for instance. The problem is you can describe it when it's being built, or you can describe it right when it's finished. But it's really hard to pick the date that happened. Now, let's say the people who built the pyramid, for all intents and purposes, were not Egyptian. Maybe they were some other group of people that existed before the Egyptians. And I'm suspect of a lot of things in Egypt having been built 1,000 years or 2,000 years before the Egyptians. So You got to kind of have that in the viewing description of the people doing the work. That'll tell you immediately, because Egyptians they look a certain way and other people don't.
So have you gone back to look at how they were constructed?
Oh yeah.
So not the date itself, but
easy.
how? Yeah.
That's an easy thing.
Okay.
What the quarries that all the stones came from are like 120 miles up the Nile. So they come down by normal currents, since they're below the place that they're harvested. And what they do when they harvest these stones is they roll them into these giant reed rafts and float them down to where the pyramids are being built. And they've dammed the river there, so they flooded that particular section of plateau, which is a little bit deeper than the rest of the plateau. So the first grouping of rocks, which are the biggest ones that built the pyramid, it's like the bottom 2/3. They're huge stones. Wow, man, that makes it really tough, because how many people would it take to do that? Well, none. You float them in on the raft. You float them right up to the location of the pyramid, and the pyramid has been flooded to the level it's at. So you come into an area of the pyramid that computes well for your raft. You just roll the stones into place. That's the first 2/3. The upper third that you now need to finish, you're still cutting the stones and floating them down from the Nile, up the Nile. So these stones are smaller, so when you flip them over onto the larger stones, they're easier for a group of people to stack. So if you look at the pyramid, the upper third is small stones, the lower 2/3 is very large stones. So I think they used the Nile and giant rafts to bring the stones down and put them in place.
The limestone, the limestone was floated down the river.
That's my sense of it. And
but have you seen this?
Yeah, I saw that remote viewing, and I said that. And the problem is they have Egyptologists in Egypt that say anything that appears on the Nile, they did. Okay, regardless of when it was done. Well, Egypt only had a finite life, so I have problems with that. There's just so many things that aren't real about what people say, and we get wrapped up in their expertise. The big thing about history, and everyone should remember this, history is always written by the winners, and the losers, in whatever way they lost, have no input whatsoever. So the thing about history is it's always wrong. There's something about it that's always wrong. And so when somebody dies, they should be probably revered in some way for the wisdom, but not for their accuracy. And it's a shame, because we keep making the same mistakes. Those are the ones we hide.
Right. So blocks were brought down the river onto the raft. They dammed the river. That created more water so that the blocks could be...
the pyramid was built in a lake.
In a lake.
So you got the first layer. Then you've got a perfect water level to make sure all those stones are balanced in their height. Because a big failure in a pyramid is from its weight. Its enormous weight in the first place is when it's past a certain point. If there's one side that's a little bit down from the rest, the whole pyramid's going to fall apart in that direction. The enormous weight's going to ensure it. Just a single few minor earthquakes and all the pyramids are gone. So
interesting.
There's a lot that goes with like doing a remote viewing in the past. When you do, you have to write the result a way that someone can read it and think about it. And and see how that could have happened.
Have you ever seen the pyramid being used? Was it ever functional, or do you feel like it was a tomb, or did it have a purpose?
Yeah, it had a purpose. I think its entire purpose was for communications. In other words, sending a beam of light carrying a raft of information on it through the pyramid and out into space. And it's funny that it's aimed specifically at the big
Orion.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So and potentially the obelisks were also
the obelisk, or some of them. Oh my God, they're huge. And the thing about an obelisk is the tough part of it's traveling very far with it. If it's just laying out there, you could conceivably cut it apart and glue it back together again. I'm not sure you could prove that today, because by the time they got the obelisk in place and glued back together, I think the intense pressure of that gluing back together would do sort of a welding act from its just sheer weight. I haven't done a lot of work on the obelisk, just the one that's iron that survived for a long time.
in India.
Yeah, in India, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. What about, have you ever looked, so I just got back from Peru. Didn't just get back from, but we went there in November, and we're just blown away by Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo Tumbo, and like that. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Like, any sense for, there's just huge mystery about how those walls were built and that method of construction. Have you ever delved into that?
A little bit. My sense of it is that they were formed that way. That they were probably poured in situ. There's evidence. I believe there's evidence that exists on the use of concrete by the Romans, as an example. The way they make concrete for stacking and sealing and whatnot, it's impossible to tell where one piece leaves off and the next one begins, unless there's a distinct color change. And their concrete, they figure is pretty crude, but its curing time is like 100 years, 200 years. So by the time we get to see what the Romans built, you couldn't tear it apart. It's just permanent. It's actually all stone. So I think here in the example of the picture, what we're seeing there is we're seeing stones that have been poured in situ.
Okay.
I think they put up these forms, and I think the forms aren't perfectly squared or flat. That's the forms they poured concrete in to make the wall higher and whatnot were probably forms that were woven from grasses or something that was not stable. So they have this sort of bulge to them. They're kind of lumpy.
Yeah, they bulge out.
That, yeah. But they would put the next layer up of the mats or whatever they use to hold the concrete in place till it's set. And that all comes from, from the local area while they're building. And that had to be grasses or bark that's been softened and woven together to hold the concrete.
So geopolymer, essentially.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they even left that didn't leave. They even carved indentations and left protuberances so that they could move them and spin them and walk them across an area. So those were all evident as well.
Yeah, there's evidence of concrete going all the way back to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Yeah.
Talking 12,000 years ago.
And some of the mixture. Mixtures of things change from culture to culture to culture. They change for no good reason because they find things that work a little better. But the actual mixtures and percentages and everything that the Romans did have proven their capability for last. I mean,
right?
They go on forever. Today's concretes, it depends on their hardness factor. Just standard old concrete, people think it cures in about 2 weeks. No, it cures over about 95 years. The longer it sits there doing what it does, the harder it gets. So I think if they paid attention to that, they could build buildings that would last a whole lot longer than they do now. But they don't seem to want to do that.
I want to go to Mars, but first, just for complete clarity, are you saying then on places that were like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, in the Sacred Valley area, that you're speculating that a geopolymer was used, or have you actually been back to remote view those locations
I've done some remote viewing of those places, and that's my belief. I mean, there's just no way that they roll a block in there and then smooth it out in this really beautiful pillow shape and then cut it to fit so tightly that you can't get anything in between the stones. No, I think it was done exactly that way. They finished the layer and then they did the next layer and the next layer.
So Mars. So one of the things that you were tasked by the CIA to remote view, and this has come out in declassified CIA documents, is Mars from 1 million BC. Which
I'm not sure the CIA tasked it. I think it was tasked by someone else.
Okay.
Because they almost never tell me how they task or what the tasking dates or any of those things are.
Was this declassified? Is there documentation that supports this mission?
Oh, and I don't know about formal, but I can tell you anybody that's ever seen the pictures, some of the pictures are self-evident. I mean, I have right now, well, let me back up a bit. It took me about 3 years to develop a relationship with someone working at Jet Propulsion Lab. That's where all the photos in space go. And the reason why is because they can't classify the photos. Photos taken by our government in space are being taken off all the hardware that we, the taxpayer, paid for. So they can't just take the information and say, no, you can't see this. They have no grounds by which to classify it. If you know that, and you know somebody in Jet Propulsion Lab, you can get them to send you pictures, and you can go over them yourself. So it took about 3 years to identify one of these people on Mars in the Jet Propulsion Lab, and he has been slipping me things like this photo of Mars. You can see the square shapes. Those aren't just natural. Natural things would be multifaceted and look like just general rock. But all the square shapes there are obviously probably building foundations that are still sitting there. And there's a lot of other stuff on Mars. And I can say this because I have 128 photos of Mars from Jet Propulsion Lab with objects that are hugely different than anything we would do.
Are you able to share?
Chinese.
You able to share those?
I can share some of them.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I can send you those when I get back.
Yeah, good. We'll insert them right here into the conversation. Yeah, good.
So, one of my detractors said, okay, now we're going to Mars. Well, the people who tasked me with Mars is when I was training for my controlling my out-of-bodies at the Monroe Institute. I was working with Bob Monroe, the original developer of the Monroe Institute. And he and I, while we were working on what was going on in a whole different target area, and the fact I was learning to do out-of-bodies and whatnot, he was training me, would occur on a weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. On Thursday night, I would leave Fort Meade after I did my last remote viewing, and I'd drive out to the Monroe Institute and get up early in the morning, and then all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I'd be in the lab in the cube. We have a big sort of deprivation chamber there. I'd be inside that, and Bob would be teaching me how to control my out-of-bodies. I did that for 14 months. In that period of time, while doing these other targets, DOD showed up, and I was taking a nap because it was, I think it was a Saturday afternoon, and I was exhausted. And he said, "You got to wake up, Joe. I have a whole new target here for you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I have an envelope, and I need you to tell me what I need to know about what's in the envelope." I said, "Fine." So I started describing these objects and these places that I thought were on Earth. I said I thought they were new discoveries. I actually said that during the session. So I'm talking about pyramids, 4-sided pyramids that were different from the ones in Egypt. I in fact said, is this a new discovery? When I saw it was a pyramid. And Bob says, "I don't know. Just tell me more about it." So I kept talking about this new pyramid. I said, "It's much larger than the one in Giza, so it has to be a new discovery. It has rooms, huge rooms in it, which have been tricked out to be places where they installed hibernation chambers. Something happened to the atmosphere. They're in trouble. A lot of ships left Mars to go somewhere else, and one came to Earth. One or two probably came to Earth." And I said, "But I said all that later. I mean, initially when I'm describing that pyramid, I didn't think I was doing Mars. I didn't think I was doing anything but Earth because they were reading GPSs to me. I had 7 targets, and they all had GPS locations. In my mind, I thought, oh, it's got to be Earth. I didn't know all the planets in our solar system have their separate GPS systems. Nobody ever told me that. So while I'm doing the descriptions, I'm thinking we're on Earth. I'm thinking it's a new discovery. And I kept asking that. Bob kept saying, "Just describe the target." And in one point I said, "The sun looks really weird." And he said, "I don't care about the sun. Keep describing what you're talking about." So I kept describing it. At some point, when I noticed the hibernation chambers and I started talking about those, I said, "There's been a huge calamity here, and the people that built these structures are waiting for survival. They're hibernating until someone comes and saves them." And I said, "This is so old, they're probably not coming now." So at the end, I started getting other information about who these people were, because Bob was asking me questions about them. And I said, "Well, they're really unusual because they look just like us and act just like us and proportionally look exactly the same, but they're like 10 and 12 feet tall." And I couldn't account for that. So I'm thinking we're back in the history of Earth a long way back, and I couldn't figure all this out. So when I came out, I'm talking about all this stuff, and the people from DOD are there. It turns out the Department of Defense turns out to have sent people out to target these. So when I met them, I said, "So what's the target?" He said, you have to ask Bob. He has the envelope in his shirt pocket. And so Bob pulled the envelope out and gave it to me. And I opened it. It said, Mars, 1 million BC. And I was like shocked for two reasons. One is at the distance in the past that I had just remote viewed, and the fact that I thought I was viewing us and it was a new discovery on Earth. The second thing that bothered me is the fact that everyone knows I don't do targets unless I can get ground truth. I have to have ground truth. Otherwise I can't improve my skill set. I have nothing to match it against that I know is true. So it's a waste of my time as far as my energy. And nobody's going to believe it anyway because there's no proof. So it's a waste of time and energy across the board. So I had made up my mind that I was going to keep the targeting material, which I did. And I got the card from the person who had listed the GPS sites, and it was 1 through 7. I never got to the 7th because I was exhausted. So what I said was, I'm keeping this card because next time I'm on the West Coast, I'm going to the Jet Propulsion Lab, and I'm going to ask them for the actual negatives, the 4x4 negatives that they're mapping Mars with, so I can check some of these locations. So they said, no one will ever give it to you. Forget it. No one's going to give you that. So next time I was on the West Coast, I went to Lawrence Livermore Lab. I went to Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I said, I'd very much like to see the 4x4 negatives from the Mars mapping satellite on this card. I handed the guy the card. He took one look at the card, and he said, well, that's the old city on Mars. And he pulled a drawer open and gave me a packet. So I brought it back, and I took the negatives to a professional lab, and I said, these are the GPS locations. On these negatives, would you find exactly that place and blow it up so I can see it? And they did that. And some of the blow-ups are really rough because when you get to that exposure and distance and everything, it's very hard to do. But it all told me that, no, this is real. It's on Mars. And so I started talking to one of the JPL guys, and within 2 years, I had him talked into sharing the information with me. So now we both have gotten 125, 130 photographs of Mars with objects, and they're obviously alien. I wanted to volunteer to go on the one-way trip to Mars when NASA sends it.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would make my wife happy, so I asked her first, and she said, "If that's what you absolutely need to do, do it." I know it's going to be a one-way trip because the greatest hazard of all is the cosmic rays. Whoever makes that trip, they're not coming back. So I just think that would be the ultimate survival trip.
Yep, for sure. So Mars had oceans back in...
in my belief, yes, they had oceans. I think they still do, but I think they're at the two poles and the two poles of the planet, and that they're just deep enough that you can see them if you're standing on one of the beaches. But you would have difficulty otherwise.
And this is the declassified document, Ryan, I guess, that is the Mars, what is it called? The Mars, CIA Mars exploration, right? So this is the conversation that was...
Yes, that's one of the conversations, let me say.
So your monocle.
Yeah, oblique view of a pyramid. Yeah, that's it. And you see the degrees north and west, if you actually use that to go to that location, you have to go out 3 iterations to get to a meter by meter. That gives you a very precise location. But if it didn't have the, if they didn't have the meter by meter, it wouldn't be worthwhile to even try to chase it down unless you could hunt through the 1,000 by 1,000 miles that they photograph.
What was the face on Mars?
I don't know. It's one thing I wasn't targeted on. I always thought it was a face. It looked to me like a face, but then they.
You got to go back, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can't pick my own targets. I have to be blind. So, eventually, if somebody, if that was put on my desk, and I had no idea what it was, not a problem. In fact, my tasker, my former tasker, my formal tasking agent, the person who receives the requirements and sets them up, is my wife. So that would be possible maybe if I was inclined to do remote viewing of that, and she would certainly provide the target, so I didn't know what was going on.
So I need to tell your wife to
yeah.
We'll get that going.
Going out of body there would be a trip.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. So have you been remote viewing like recently? Have you kept doing it after your career?
Yeah, I'm what you call an unpaid consultant.
Yeah.
The fact that they shut the program down does not necessarily mean that people stopped asking me for stuff.
Right.
So when somebody asks, I do, and I try to. One of the more important things is I tried to keep the word out that I would help to find missing children and things like that. One of the things I got involved in, they had a thing in Japan. It was called Battle TV. Is remote viewing real or is it not? And so I agreed to go to Japan and be on this television show. And this Battle TV television show is where they have 2 panels. They have a panel that's people pro, believing in it, and people negative, don't believe in it. The pro people on the show were postgrads. They actually came onto the studio with colanders on their heads, and these bouncing stars on springs and stuff. Looked pretty stupid, but that's what they did. They were very supportive of me. Across from them were professors from the University of Tokyo. And the lead professor said something like, I can't remember exactly now, but he said, let me capture it here a minute. What he said was, we have called someone, and they're coming to the studio, and they're bringing photographs of their operations, their business. Nobody knows what it is. We just call them out of the phone book. And so when they come, before they get here, we want you to describe exactly what they do, what their business looks like. So I immediately started getting, sports arena. I drew a curved glass wall. I said this is some kind of an overhead view, and there's bleachers behind the glass wall, and there's a big open space in front of it, and it has something to do with a sports arena. But I couldn't figure out what the sports was. Yeah, it was giving me a really bad time. So I drew some things, and then they got a call that the guy had arrived at the studio, so they brought him in, and he introduced himself. And everybody said, "Do you know who this guy is?" I said, "I haven't got a clue." and neither did some of the people in the studio, because he had just gotten there, and they called him out of the clear blue. When they asked him what he did and what kind of business he ran, he stood up and he handed a stack of pictures, obviously Polaroids, to the head of the program, guy running the program. And he looked at this stuff and started smiling. And what it turned out to be, I'm saying sports arena, but I couldn't tell what sports. And I'm drawing this glass wall with cars parked in front of it. And it looked very much like it was a sports arena. Had flags all along the top edge. And so when the guy pulled his card out, put it on the counter, what it said was he was a car dealer. And the name of his company was Sports Arena Sports Cars in Japan. And I think everybody in the building took a deep breath. And what was interesting is before the show even started, this was an hour show, before it started, the head of, I think it was the head of the physics department at University of Tokyo, he gave this huge impassioned speech, and he said, I'm going to come in when this is all over. If it works, I'm going to go through frame by frame, and before I'm through, I will tell you exactly how it was done. It's a trick. Okay. So it happened. It worked great. Oh, and he said, if I can't tell you how it was done, I'll resign my position at the University of Tokyo. He's the head of the whole physics department. So it worked beautifully. So he came in 3 days in a row after they had filmed it, edited it and put it out as a program. 3 days later, he came in and he asked to see the films, and they set him in a room with the film, and he went frame by frame by frame, over and over for, golly, had to be 3 days, and never did figure out what the trick was, because it was none. And so that place there, the studio, asked him if he was going to resign his position at the University of Tokyo. And he said, oh, no, of course not. And they said, then you won't appear on Channel 4 again. Because in Japan, it's a point of honor. You make a statement like that, you got to back it up. Well, that wound up involving me in a series of 2-hour specials about every other month, where double blind in my dining room at home on the mountain in the same valley as the TMI, the Monroe Institute. They would fly a guy in from Japan. All he would know is the description of the target individual that was missing. And I would give the description. If it was correct, he'd say proceed. And then I would tell them how to find those people wherever they were in the world. And in fact, I found out of 24 people, I found 12, exactly half. Now, my detractors said, oh, well, there's only 5 major cities in Japan. You could guess the city and be right. Okay. All but, I think, 3 were outside outside of Japan. They were in Philippines, Mexico, Canada, U.S. They were all over the world. And I found a woman, Japanese woman, and her daughter, who had been kidnapped off the streets of Tokyo and taken to North Korea to teach the North Korean soldiers how to speak Japanese. And nobody knew that. But I said, that's what happened. And in remote viewing where her location was, I found that she had escaped from there. But instead of coming south to try to get back into South Korea, she went north and crossed the river into China. So she's in China with her daughter, and a huge resort area, which the Chinese built specifically for vacationing businessmen. And what they had there was big hotels and golf courses and swimming and heated pools. They had all this stuff for businessmen to relax. And so what the studio did is the studio took a film crew in to film that new huge valley with all the golf stuff and everything, and found the two women, the mother and the daughter, and brought them out as part of the film crew. And when I flew over to Japan for the chat show portion, they actually walked him out on the stage. Even better was the first guy I did. It's a woman, 38 years old. When her father walked out the door, she was a year old, and she hadn't seen him since. Nobody had. So she flash forward. She's now 38 years old, married, and has twin boys, identical twin boys. They're 8 years old. And she wants to introduce them to their grandfather because that's ancestry is a big deal in Japan. The problem is, she has no idea where they are. So she comes to the studio and asks if I would look for them. I said, sure. So they're out at my home in Milledgeport, Virginia, and we're sitting in the dining room, and I described him perfectly, and the age he should be. And first words out of my mouth, oh, well, he's not Japanese, he's Korean. And the guy says, stop, must call Tokyo, because that's like, oh, I'm sorry, he's Puerto Rican, he's not white, that kind of thing, or not, whatever. But so he calls Tokyo, and he comes back, sits down, and says, proceed. So I gave him directions. It took 8.5 hours of remote viewing to do this. All I do is drink ice water the whole time. And I gave them directions, and they turned it all over to a professional detective agency. And they sent a crew out to follow my instructions, which they did to the letter, and wound up in Busan, Korea, standing in a graveyard looking at his identity stick. The guy had been dead 6 years. So I found a dead man 6 years in a different country. And he wasn't Japanese. It turns out he had a half-brother in the records, and they talked to him, and he was Korean. He was a month old when he was brought to Japan and raised as Japanese, and the only person who knew was his father.
Incredible.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And
yeah, that's once. I mean, you've had so many success stories.
Yeah,
you've had so many.
Sure.
You talk about like the Russian submarine.
the submarine. I mean, that was.
I feel like you've covered that one. On a handful of other podcasts. It was mind blowing though. But I mean, to have all of these success stories, and you found children that have been missing. Like what do the detractors say? What can they really say to because this what you're doing doesn't fit into their reality, and so
it doesn't. They don't. They can't deal with it.
Right.
My detractors. A lot of what they say is kind of interesting. One is. I've done 51 of these on national television in 7 countries, completely blind, randomly chosen targets, usually a street corner somewhere in the city chosen randomly. And what they say is, well, you do a whole lot of drawings and you cherry pick only the ones that match. You leave all the other bad ones on the floor. Not true. The only things I draw are the things that are absolutely necessary, and you can see all of my drawings for anything I did every time I do it. So that's just BS. Some of the other things my detractors say is, well, you probably spent your own time out looking for this guy. I'm trying to think of some other things.
Does anybody come out and say that you might be a disinformation guy from within the government?
No, but a Russian said it to me. You know who he was?
No.
Head of the Red Army.
Huh.
He was a 5-star, and I had coffee with him in Moscow. And while we're having coffee, he pulled my book out of his back pocket. And he carried it in his back pocket so long it was wound up really tight. You had to stand on both sides of it to sign it. So I said, listen, why don't you let me get you a hardcover in Russian? He said, no, it's got to be this book. And I said, look, it's printed, Russian's printed in pencil between the American lines. But let me get you a better book. No, got to be this book. I said, why? He said, because when it first came out, you talked about the Typhoon submarine in your book. He says, there's no way that existed. He said, the book was in print 5 years when I got it. And I knew there was no Typhoon submarine. He said. And then so I said, so why do you want me to sign it? It must be disinformation. He said, no, it's not, because I found out 5 years later that there really was a Typhoon submarine. Now, I'm the head of the Red Army. You think they tell me? No. I had to get it from your book. I said, are you absolutely sure? You know, now sometimes people write a book, and it's all straight up except for 1 or 2 facts. Those may be lies. He said, not possible. And I said, why do you say that? He said, because our spy in your Defense Intelligence Agency told me it was real. So we're sitting there, and he said that, and I'm like, wow. So I said, could you give me just the initials? He said, oh, no, I could never do that. They bury me under the front steps of the FSB. So I said, it's okay. When you go to sleep tonight, I'll get it anyway. And he went, oh, my God. And he tried to run out of the room. And I said, calm down. I can't do that. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, because, I mean, the only way, you're clearly not, just some crazy person that's making up a story that's just lying, because you've got the backing of the CIA, of the government. I mean, they've released declassified documents to some degree. They admit that you're real, that the program existed and that you were within the program. Yeah. So, I mean, either this is true and we were doing this, or this is some disinformation campaign. I don't see any other any other place that detractors could take this. I mean, it's either real or it's disinformation.
Well, you could look me up on Wikipedia and see what they say. Yeah, they just bald-faced lie.
Yeah, well, Wikipedia we know it's
trash.
It's a joke. Yeah.
And for a while I tried to keep it straight, keep it accurate. Forget it. No, the big thing for my detractors is no matter what I do to prove it's real, they will come up with some idea for how it's a lie. And yet the perfection of the protocol is it's impossible to produce something in remote viewing that there is not a record for, that shows that it's real, shows that it worked, shows that it was correct. Now, I'm not saying it works every time. About 35% of the time, it doesn't work at all. It's a total failure. In fact, when it's a total failure, it can be really sticky. I was in a show in Japan where they pulled this absolutely gorgeous young woman, out of a panel, and they said, "Can you tell us where she was at 8:00 at night on Saturday?" And I said, "Yes." When I said that, I felt this huge burst of energy from her, which was very negative. She had a lot of fear. So I kept saying, yeah, I can do that. So they pulled her aside, and then they set up the stuff for me to draw and all that. And you know it failed. And in front of 32 million people, it just didn't work. And so the guy came and he put the mic in front of my face and he said, "Why do you think it didn't fail this time? Or why do you think it didn't work this time? It failed." I took a deep breath and I thought for a minute and I turned to the audience and I bowed and I said, "I'm so sorry. It's all me. It's all my fault. It didn't work." And the next day on the newspaper in Tokyo, it was saying, "Western psychic admits personal failure." And I asked them why that was so important. It had to go in the newspaper. And what they told me was interesting. They said everybody that's ever been on that particular show that talked about, something that they didn't do right, their reason is always there's too much electromagnetics on the floor, too many wires in the studio, the lights are too bright, the audience is mumbling. It's always something else that caused the failure. You're the first one to actually take full responsibility for it. And I said, "Well, why wouldn't I?" And they said, "Well, in Japan, our culture dictates if you take full responsibility for the rewards, when you screw up, you got to take that full responsibility as well." I agree with them. It's like, it's the way life is. And but I get along with the Japanese people very well. What I like about them is if they come to me and say, "You want to come and demonstrate remote viewing or something," I never had any problem doing that with them, because in Japan, they don't believe something unless somebody says, "Yeah, I can do that." And then they say, "Get the camera, we're going to watch him do it." And they film me doing it. And if I succeed, great. If I don't, equally great, because they like someone who stands here and says, "This is why it failed." When it succeeds, they like that too. But if someone else stepped out of the crowd and said, "I can do what he does," then they'll get another camera and say, "Go ahead." Because they don't believe, because one person can do it, anybody can do it. It's if one person can do it and has demonstrated that, then anybody else making that claim has to also demonstrate that. And that's a healthier position, I think, for everything in reality.
How do you start the process? Like, I know we kind of tried to touch on this a little bit, but like, I'm still not visualizing like how you actually begin the remote viewing process. Like, is there, I understand the setting and all that, but is there something that goes through your mind? Is there some practice? Is like, how do you physically begin to visualize?
Well, my whole life as a viewer, I try to do 1 or 2 viewings a day. And the reason why is it's the way your subconscious talks to your conscious mind. The problem is the subconscious has no language of its own. So what it does is it borrows from the conscious mind. So you got right there, you have a sudden 3-way difficulty. First is the subconscious is going to borrow something from the conscious mind that's not exact. So if it's a sewage processing plant, they may show you a backyard swimming pool. So there, you right from the get-go, the subconscious is lying. But if you say you get something from the subconscious and the subconscious says it's a backyard swimming pool, the first thing you should do is take the facts that make it a backyard swimming pool and tear them apart. If I were to leap into it, would that be pleasant? Oh, God, no. Okay, so we know it's not water. If I were to put some in a glass and taste it, oh, geez, forget it, So then it goes to smell, and it goes to touch, and it goes to a lot of other things. So it's sort of, you got to interpret what your subconscious is trying to tell you. The problem is most people say if in your description of a target, if if you're describing it exactly as it's being fed to you, you'll fail. If you describe it exactly as it is, nobody wants anybody to know you're doing that. And so it I don't know, the whole thing about remote viewing is there's only one way to do it. You got to perfect the protocol. You got to practice it till you can't stand it any longer, and then practice it the same amount of time. Or when you use it for only the best targets, like missing kids or something, because I think eventually you get burned out. I think that's what happened to me. 48 years of viewing was enough. And I was the first one, actually the only one who came out of the Stargate program at my retirement, and then went on to do 51 demonstrations live on camera in 7 countries, and I became a demonstrator of it in the lab. As soon as I retired, I went right to Stanford Research Institute, because I inherently knew they were finding things out, discovering things, and nobody was sharing it. It turns out when they closed the project down, Stargate down, and they moved the 156 boxes from Fort Meade to a closet in Langley, what they discovered is inside one of those boxes were 9 or 10 registered mail packets. You can send up to secret material through the registered mail system where you have receipts and everything. And there were at least, 15, maybe 19 or 20 packets from Stanford Research Institute to the Stargate program at Fort Meade. This is how you can improve it. This is what we discovered about things you don't want to do. Every single one of those packets, the seals had never been broken on. When I asked, why did you guys ignore all this? The answer I got was, well, scientists don't know anything about collection of intelligence. That's false. If it wasn't for the science, we wouldn't have remote viewing. They knew exactly how it works, up to a point. So there's a mistrust between the effective using of it and the development of it, or the continuing science of it. And that bothered me a lot. That's why I went right to SRI. When they shut it down at SRI and moved it to Science Applications International Corporation, they shut it down in the one, and I was fired, and I went to the new one where I was hired. And then when the program ended in November of 1995, they fired me from SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, and I went across the road and went to the Laboratories for Fundamental Research in Palo Alto. So I have 38 years of research experience, as well as the remote viewing. So, I've just spent a lot of time learning as much as I can about it, where most people try to avoid the practice.
Sure. So what does it look like when you're gathering that information? Like, what are you physically seeing? You're seeing the outline. You're seeing shapes, and how does that translate and transport back to your body from that location?
We don't know.
Yeah.
We know it's not electromagnetic. Well, a woman named Hella Hammond, who was a professional photographer in New York, who worked at Stanford Research Institute, they took her out in a submarine and took her to a depth where neutrinos have problems. She, in fact, they made 2 trips because she got, it was a bath escape, a bathysphere That's a sphere.
Forget about her. But what does it look like? Like, how does the data count? Like, what are you seeing? You know, like, does it look different than just if you're just looking with your eyes?
You're not seeing anything.
Okay.
And that's the problem.
Okay.
It's a bad title. Remote viewing, you see it. No, you don't. What you get is the smell, the taste, the touch, the feeling. You get all the senses. And sometimes it'll include sight. But I've done probably 25,000 remote viewings, and I've only seen part of the target maybe 5 times.
So there's no visual.
You build it in your head from the sensing. So if I see something, or I think I'm seeing something, it's usually probably something my mind created, so it's coming out of left field. So I would have to say, excuse me, but let me ask you about something like, I'm trying to explain this. My subconscious is going to say something to me about it. And what I have to do is not accept that completely. I have to ask my subconscious to test it for me. So it's like I was saying earlier, if the target's a septic system, and you're getting the information from your subconscious that is very much like a backyard swimming pool, you can't accept that. You have to challenge it. And the way you challenge it is you take the salient points of what makes it a backyard swimming pool, and you pull those up. Like, if it's a backyard swimming pool, it should have a smell to it. And it should be semi-pleasant, like clean water. And you say, okay, tell me what it smells like. And the smell you get is like rancid. Well, it certainly isn't a backyard swimming pool, because you wouldn't get in it. The second thing would be what's going on in the swimming pool. Well, it's breaking down of nutritious or non-nutritious garbage or whatever. Whatever you get from that. And you go, oh, it's definitely not a backyard swimming pool. But now I know it's got really bad smell. It's something I wouldn't go near. And you just keep going until you have enough data to say, in all probability, the only thing this would fit would be a septic system of some kind. And that's what you come up with.
Okay.
But to get there, you got to go around the centerpiece 3 times and down the hall and the left and the right. In your head, you got to go through everything over and over and over until you can make that statement. You can't just like remember something and say it's a. And in fact, in remote viewing, it was never designed to be known. In remote viewing, it might be, let's say they have a hostage, and the hostage is being held in a huge apartment building, and you know he's in there because you caught somebody's cousin who knows who's in there and knows the person that took the person. And so you know they're in there. You don't. The problem you have now is which of the 5 doors do I kick in to get there the fastest? Since you've never been in the building, you try to at least get a directional report on it using viewing, or in viewing you want to know which door. And my buddy Hartleigh Trent, who is a better viewer than I'll ever be, came in one morning and he said, you know that hostage in that building? I said, yeah. He said, I've been working on which entry to enter by till the cows come home. And I worked on it all night. And you know, all he gets is the smell of roses. So you look at the building, and lo and behold, in front of number 2 door, the elderly woman that lives on the ground floor planted a rose garden. That's the door they go through. And they got to the hostage within a second and a half. He had the gun against the back of the guy's head and was cocking the trigger. So
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
bits and pieces
Yeah.
that answer the problem.
Yeah.
That's what critically comes out of remote viewing.
If you had to share something about Hartleigh Trent, I know that he was a good friend of yours and,
Yes.
and meant a lot to you. What would you like people to know about him?
Hartleigh Trent was big time Italian, which is great because you always want to eat with him when he went to lunch. Hartley was retired Navy. He was a photo interpreter. So he spent his many hours looking at huge blow-ups of things, trying to determine things like how long is the antenna on the back of the Jeep that pulls the 106 recoilless rifle. Well, that tells you if you can figure out the length of that antenna, it will tell you exactly what kind of radio they're using and what the distance of the radio is, so what unit he's probably working with. The guy going down the road pulling the 106. That's what he did for a living. And the one thing he always did when he had a remote viewing is he went to a place where he could do the remote viewing, and in doing so, he would be reporting on things that that made sense to him. So he would never be describing things in remote viewing that were knowledgeable. He'd never name anything. That's the point I'm trying to reach. He may see something of incredible detail, but he will never allow himself to go to a conclusion by putting two parts together. He always assumed that the two parts were separate and that the two parts were individually important to the completion of whatever these people were doing. So he was more detail-oriented than I am, and he was able to really pay attention to it. And the second thing he was much better at than I is he could turn it off and restart anytime he wanted, or stop in the middle of a remote viewing and come back 4 hours later and pick up where he left off. He was a very brilliant guy. But Agent Orange that infected everybody got to him too. At least I think it was Agent Orange. I'm not sure. I was there when he died, and he was comatose for quite a while. Just before he died, he sat bolt upright in the bed. His wife was on one side. I and our training instructor was on the other side, and acted totally normal. It was like, everything's fine. You were worrying about me for nothing. Then he turned to me and he said, did I ever introduce you to my Uncle Charlie or something? And I said, no. And he said, come over here, Uncle Charlie. I want you to meet Joe. I'm shaking air. People started appearing in the room.
Yep. That's a near death.
Yeah.
That's very, very common.
Incredible.
Yeah. I've had a hospice nurse that that I've talked to, and she's dealt with thousands of people who have died. And that's a very common thing, that they see relatives and they have what's called a near death rally. Yeah. And they become very lucid as they approach death. They sit up, they start talking as if everything's normal. I mean, Alzheimer's patients, dementia patients, that's a very common thing.
And there was something else about, Hartley because he was a photo interpreter, he wore these goggles for glasses. If he ever wanted to do a remote viewing, he had to have his glasses on so you could see while he was remote viewing.
Okay.
When you're not seeing anything.
Right.
And in fact, one of the downsides to learning it is most people come in, and as soon as they start to learn it, they hang the thing on where they can the envelope. They put the envelope where they can see it. They sit there, and the first thing they do, Hartleigh Trent would do, is he'd say, "Oh my God, I forgot my glass." He'd grab his glass, put it on, and then ignore the envelope. It was not to see the envelope. It was for no reason other than he thought he would screw up what he was looking at.
Interesting.
When he couldn't see anything. Everybody had their little knack of doing things. The only other person who went from the Stargate program into the lab to work in the science side was a woman who came not too long after I retired, and her name was Ford, Angela Ford, and she's an automatic writer. And the reason automatic writing, you think that they're trying to write something, but it's all gibberish. No, what that is by using a pen and making designs and doing whatever with it, it distracts your ego away from the target so that you can get a clear picture of what the target is. And she's really good at that, shutting down her ego.
Hartleigh was as well?
Everybody was in the original 6 and her. When she came into the unit, I just left, and I was the last one in the original group. And what was interesting to me is that she volunteered to be in the unit. She actually had a better job, a job where I think she could have gone to the very top in the GS scale in the government. She was an analyst in a whole totally different area, but she thought she could do better in the remote viewing arena because she'd been having experiences her whole life. So she volunteered and got picked up.
Joe, you mentioned that there was a situation where you were in, I think you said, this was last night at dinner, an office with somebody, and this person was not convinced that you were telling the truth, and he said, essentially said, like, you've got that's BS. How did you know whatever it was that you knew?
Yeah.
And you're not leaving here until you tell me how.
Right.
And you're like, well, you eventually had to tell him something about his wife and his family that proved to him that you were a psychic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can you drive us through that situation?
Yeah. What happened? We were monitoring the hostages in Iran. We did that for 14 months, and we each had a handful of hostages that we know were in the embassy in Tehran, in Iran, and so we each had different groups, and my particular group were different from anybody else's, but across the board we started picking up. We were talking about their health and welfare, how they were being treated, what they were being fed. Just generally, are you taking care of our people? And in that process, we started picking up on things. Stolen vehicles being hidden in garages. Stolen, give me a second, recall these things. Stolen vehicles, they were assembling heavy machine guns and things and hiding them. And these were not Iranians, and we could figure out what's going on because it wasn't part of monitoring the hostages. So we made an addendum to the reports and added some things. And my boss at the time said, we will report these things separate, but try to keep on the hostages. Okay, fine. Well, we got this thing in the inbox from the Pentagon, and what it was a note: send over your best viewer. We got a question we need to ask. So I went over to the Pentagon, and when I went into this office, there were a bunch of people in there, and the guy in charge was a colonel who was the head of I think black operations or something. I can't remember now, but he had something to do with the hostages. And I reported to him formally, which you're supposed to do. And while I'm staying there at attention, he says, you threw everybody else out of the office. And he says, He didn't tell me to at ease or anything, so I'm still staying at attention. He opens his drawer and pulls out a 45, racks a round in it. Maybe. There's no way to know when you pull the slide back and let it go. He laid it on the desktop and he said, one of our problems here, he said, there's like 11 people in the entire world know that we're planning for a rescue of hostages in Iran. And I suddenly have number 12 standing here in front of me. And I said, well, you know what I do? And he said, I don't believe any of that. I think it's crap. You're going to either tell me what your source is or you're not leaving here. So he's thinking I have a source and we're getting information that way and we're putting it on a paper or whatever. And he's saying, yeah, you know, you can't, you're privy to something that you should not know. And that puts the whole rescue attempt at risk. So we would like you to tell us what your source is or you're not walking out of here. And I'm staying there at attention. I'm thinking, this is a scary situation. And this guy does not believe in psychic functioning. He only believes what he believes. So I did the only thing I could do is I told him something about his interactions or his history with his wife. He didn't want anybody to know about. And he believed me. The problem was it really pissed him off. So he hates me now, I'm sure. But it convinced him that I was producing the information as a psychic. That was a downside to the whole program, in fact. If you knew 100 people, 50 of them loved what you were doing and 50 of them hated you for it. And that was part of the stress.
Can you say who that guy was?
No.
No. Okay.
I can't. But
so that ability that you have right there to know something about his wife, that's a separate ability?
Yeah, that's psychic functioning.
Yeah,
that's, you know, when you absolutely need something and it's a survival mechanism, then it's like everybody in our family group suddenly are sleeping 400,000 years ago. We're sleeping in caves, and there's 3 caves, and one of them the cave bear is coming back to. And so we have a guy in the family who says, no, I'm not sleeping in that cave. That's where the bear is coming. And everybody else says, oh, it's just a little bear, no big deal. We'll just like sleep there anyway. Where I wouldn't in a million years, but that's how psychic our families were back then. There was no language, grunts and points. How would you warn people of that?
You think, how long do you think humans have been on this planet?
Human?
Yeah.
30 million years.
Wow.
There's evidence of that.
Yeah.
It's in Forbidden Archaeology by Dr. Cremo and Dr. Thompson. Thompson died, I think, last year.
Cremo's coming on the show, actually, in a couple
cool.
weeks. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to have to watch that.
Yeah.
I recommend the book to everybody because the problem with history is that most people think it's absolutely right, and it's not. History's written by the winners, so it's wrong from the get-go. And some of the things we're taught in school just clearly aren't true. There's so much evidence for historical information on human that they end us out like they take us back 100,000 years. That's it. No.
Right.
There's evidence.
It used to be 10, then it was 40, then it was 60, now it's 100. I mean, we just keep getting older.
There's evidence it's
190 now, but
there were 7 civilizations in a cave between the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. You can't get to the cave now because it's underwater. They dammed everything. there's evidence in that cave that a dig was done by someone from, let me see, the guy who originally discovered there was this group of people who lived in the cave. They were mining semi-precious stones from the cave. Went back 56,000 years. They were making amulets and things you hung around your neck.
Sure.
And whatnot. And he believed that he could push jewelry making back another 20,000 years if he could do a dig there. And which he did. And in that just 1 year, one summer dig, he pushed jewelry making back to like 88,000 years.
Yep.
Now, when he did that, in that process, he decided he needed to come back because he discovered under that first civilization was another one. So he brought a bunch of people with him when he came back. He did a 5-year dig. And in the 5-year dig, what he said was, there is evidence here of, I can't remember if it was 5 or 7 civilizations, one under the other. And that's no big deal. It pushed jewelry making way back. But the thing about it that was a surprise is the fact that the deeper they went, the more sophisticated the jewelry got. You know, the bracelets and things. So that's evidence of a failing society because they were falling apart. They weren't progressing. They were going the opposite direction. So I think that's happened probably 5 or 6 times to humans.
So why do you think that we're finding dinosaur bones from 70 million years, 62 million years ago, but we're not finding human bones from 35 million years ago?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's because dinosaurs, when they ate a human, spread the bones all over the woods for get-go there. But I think you do find evidence of humans. You just don't recognize it as human.
Okay.
And people aren't looking for it, so they don't discover it. There are, I've seen bones and things that try to extrapolate and tell you that these are from like, million and a half years ago, something like that. Nobody will buy that. But, it's difficult to get people to believe it. And if they do believe it, they don't write the paper.
Right.
So nobody will print it.
Right.
And that's what the Forbidden Archaeology book's all about.
What's your take on maybe last question or maybe 2 here, but what's your take on religion and based on, having an out-of-body experience and seeing that light and, like just all of the experiences that you've had and the knowledge that you possess, what are your thoughts on religion? I
think religion is a good thing. Everybody thinks they're following a different denomination, they're following a different religion. That's not actually true. I think what they believe is that theirs is the only true religion. And that's not because, certainly not because of, how I'm getting lost here for a second. I think the problem is that all the religions in their original form, that's Buddha and Christ and Muhammad and whoever else, the original prophets, Moses, I think they all say the same message. It's all in agreement. There's almost no dissension there. The problem is religion is also a good way to make a good living. And so people take over and they apply their own branding to it. And then it becomes, you will believe this or we'll burn you at the stake or whatever. So it's one denomination trying to take power over all humans, and because of the way we respond to it, we respond to it exactly that way. We find the one that suits us, and that becomes the one we'll die for. But not in reality. We claim we will, but we won't. It's arrogant. It's a quest for power. I mean, it took. I'm trying to remember when the Nicene get together took place. I think it was around 1500 something. But when that occurred, they eliminated a bunch of books from the Bible that authorized women to be priests. They eliminated certain denominations who were part of being Catholic. There's just a lot of stuff that's where religion is manipulated in some way to control people. Power and money. That ruins everything. Always has, always will.
Power is a bit of an illusion, and money is probably also an illusion, but it definitely corrupts people.
Yeah.
But so your thought is that there is a God, but it's not a...
Yeah, but here's my problem.
Yeah.
Personally, if I want to worship something, I just go outside.
Right.
I mean, in a sense, I could be inside, but I'll just go outside where the trees and the forest are. I'll walk through the forest because that's a better creation than anybody's ever going to tell me they can produce.
Right.
And then secondary to that is I'm not sure, because any of the prophets said there is a God. I'm not sure they understood that. I think most of the prophets, in their wisdom, have chosen to say the same message, but then provide the tools to humans to twist it and bend it to their own ends. So if we could make a pronouncement over how we would treat other people, that alone would make things better. But when it comes down to actually God, and you can put that in quotes, for me, God could be an algorithm that keeps everything in order, that promises us that if we follow the original prophets, we will never have to fear again. But that's not how it works. People take advantage of it, make money.
Right.
Rule the world.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff.
Well, good, Joe. It's been a fascinating conversation, man. I super appreciate it. What did we miss, if anything?
I think the part we missed is where humans came from.
Okay. All right. You want to cover it?
Yeah. It's my firm belief that we're the only aliens on this planet, Earth. And the reason I say that is because everything we do on this planet is for money, more power, or to survive. But in all our efforts on everything we do on this planet, it's destructive. Because we take and we take and we take and we take from the planet till we should not be doing that. We should not be exercising that kind of power on the earth itself. The earth is our nest. It's our home. It's the only one we have. And we've already possibly damaged it beyond control. I don't actually believe that, because I think that that the earth could provide us with a home for a long, long time if we just honored it in a way that would be proper. But no, we take. We never give anything back. We never help in any way, shape, or form. So where do you think all the water's going? And where is all the lack of understanding for climate change going? We're destroying the very nest we live in. A tribe of wolves won't do that. If something happens and they're starving, they kill off the old, they kill off the young, and they'll move 300 miles and reestablish themselves and follow exactly the same rules, which happen to be, don't do any harm, kill only the animals that are crippled or lame, don't ruin the breeding grounds. There's a lot of things that they do, but we don't. We just keep taking and taking and taking. So Mother Earth is an entity unto herself, and she's going to take revenge on us one day, and we're not going to like it. I think she's already started, and we're going to wind up paying for that. I just wish people would understand that it's nice to do and be however we want to be, but not at all of mankind's. It's not good to destroy everything that supports us.
We're throwing a party. Yeah, we're definitely throwing a party. For me, it's not as much about hot, cold, and like CO2 versus oxygen. It's more about the poisons. It's more about just chemicals and pesticides.
Anything you do, you can get carried away with.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like and I'm a firm believer in like gun control. Okay, but there's a number of things I have to say about it, if that's true. Okay, I think gun control needs to be done to the point that people can't hurt other people just out of meanness or out of stupidity or out of a lack of respect for what it can do or not do. But when it comes to like semi-automatic rifles, you got to remember the Civil War, the First World War, the Korean War, the Second World War, the Korean War, all the soldiers who fought in those wars brought their own weapons home. We fought the Vietnam War, Iraqi War, and a whole bunch of others, and none of us are allowed to do that because we might do something horrible. No, if you look and check, the possibility of a combat experienced person in the military shooting somebody else is extremely remote, probably has never happened. What they do is they shoot themselves because they are so sick of it. If they reach a point where they don't want to be here anymore, they don't kill other people, they kill themselves. That's what vets do. But you have to also rationally realize that if you have, I'm going to bring up something that's an actual truth, okay? We have wild pigs going crazy on our farms right now, and every year it's gone from like 1.5 billion in damage to 3 billion in damage to 8 billion in damage. It just keeps getting higher and higher, and we don't make enough food now to feed the world. So farmers who have small plots are trying to maintain a living from their farmlands. When pigs come on their property, they can't shoot one bullet per gun, because if they hit the pig, the rest of the herd takes off running, and they don't stop for 30 miles till they're on somebody else's farm. So the obvious need would be for that farmer to have a semi-automatic rifle where he can shoot a lot of pigs in 80 seconds. That's the only way he can deal with the problem. But nobody cares about that. it's like no one should have it. In other words, when something isn't controlled, it's then no, nobody can have it. It reminds me of punishment in the military. One guy goes to the town, gets absolutely wasted on beer, and smashes a bar up, so the commander of the whole base puts it off limits to everybody. That's not justice. That's taking it out on everybody. There's a belief, I think, that if you attack one person really hard, everybody get a lesson out of it. No, that's not how it works. It's unfair and it's unjust. So, yeah, there should be rules, and everybody should be able to deal with those rules. But the people that don't want to do that are the people who want it in spite of what everybody else wants. And that's wrong. Simply wrong. They forget the reason why they live on this planet with everybody else.
Right.
That's just one example. There's so many examples of fairness that makes me tired. And it's power and money right now. It's all power and money.
Right.
And an idiot child.
Yeah.
As far as I'll go with that, but
yeah, I feel like the hot cold thing. There's definitely natural fluctuations in Earth's temperature, and when you start talking about CO2 versus oxygen, there's been times where, especially think back to the dinosaurs, where the CO2 has been just far more extreme than it is right now. But for me, it's all this. The fact that living beings can't drink from any waterways that exist anywhere on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Anymore.
Yeah.
Everything's poisoned.
That's another prime example.
Yeah, everything's just toxic. But it's probably not worth going down that rabbit hole. I mean,
not right now.
yeah. When you said that humans are the aliens, I mean, what are you, double click on that for me, though.
Okay. The point is that humans have no respect for their very need to have a home and a nest. We ignore that fact completely. We just, in general, do everything we possibly can to destroy it to some point. Like the perfect example is heavy metals in the water, illegal dumping, not paying attention to how we put in filter systems or gas systems, or cheating the system where instead of purifying the air, we just belch it out with any kind of toxin it might have in it. Those kinds of things. No, if you're going to be righteous about the protection of our nest, it has to be across the board. Anything and everything that could damage it has got to be taken care of. Whatever that is, it doesn't matter. The same thing with, traffic. You get too much traffic in a city, it becomes more of an irritant than anything else, and people start getting hurt. So the infrastructure has to be maintained. Or if people want more than the infrastructure, let's say they want free education. Well, okay, pay tax for it. You demand something, you need to pay for it. But no, they want everything under the sun, but don't want to pay for it. That's irrational. It's not even rational. So it's that kind of thing we're really talking about here. And when we're not quite as complicated, well, we're a lot more complicated than wolves. But it just goes to the fact that many, many animals on this planet are way smarter than we are when it comes to protecting their interest here. I don't know.
Basically.
I'm offended by the lack of empathy for other human beings, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep. And is that ego, you think? That's
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the same thing that won't permit remote viewing to work.
Yep.
It's the ego.
Yep. Well, Joe, it's been fascinating, man. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate all of your knowledge. I think we've gone for 3 hours, maybe, or so, give or take. It feels like about that. It's hard to it's a time warp in this place, but no, I really appreciate you coming down for this, and I know you don't do a lot of these, so so it's been
as
great.
I get older, I find I lose more and more energy faster.
Sure, yeah, no, but appreciate you spending some energy in here. It's really been fascinating.
Thank you. I like being here.
Yep.
You've been very supportive of me while I'm here, and that's good.
Great. All right, we'll wrap it up with that, man. Appreciate it. Let's get some food.
Thank you.
All right.